There in the first place she wondered if what an oblivious monster it was. The test assigned to her was pretty simple within the given time they were to collect as many coins placed within the dungeon as they could. The exams was specified in a low ranking dungeon to stimulate real-life combat prowess, which ought to have been quite easy. As she cowers behind the trees recalling the details, a humongous ape-like monster rips apart the canopy around. Looking at her, it smashes one of its 4 fists into the ground, sending her flying amongst the tremors and debris. It was impossible for her to run away. She knocks 3 arrows on her bow while the juvenile titan ape, a 3-star rank monster, stared at her. She shoots the arrows at once. The ape shields himself with one of his huge arms and swats the arrows like flies. When nothing significant happens, she powerlessly watches him raise his arm, about to smash her to smithereens. She weeps out the way of his punch, knocking 3 more arrows. She knew she could not pierce his hide, but regardless if it shoots, they perch at his wide chest as he waves his tongue at her as if mocking her as it charges towards her. She was anxious. She in reality was baiting him since the very beginning. As it closes and she notches a single arrow on her bow while aiming. Jean Sarim belonged to an archer class who could imbue magic on their arrows. A magic ranger. The types of magic one could imbue on their arrows were numerous. She shoots it and activates her skill, flame bombardment. What she decided to do was an explosion of the highest possible degree she could manage. The offensive power was enough to kill a monster within the 3-star range, but only if it landed. She watches the towering ape in horror. She had nothing else to resort to now. She decides to escape, but the ape was too quick for her to outrun. As it reaches out towards her, a devastating blow blasts at his face. Jarian had arrived on the scene. She looks above her towards Jarian, baffled. The hint had smote the giant ape's chin. Although he had landed a considerably strong blow, it wasn't enough to take it down. He brings out an unknown gun-like item and dives towards the monster. Jean is shocked at his frontal assault as the ape pulls to punch at him. He shouts the notified Jean to shut her eyes closed. Jean reaches out his hand with the unknown item towards the ape's face. He shoots it and a blinding light disperses throughout the forest. As Jean covers her eyes, the ape's eyes are overwhelmed by the light. As it screeches and screams in shock, Jarian lands and repents that he had used up all of his last of the stunning torches. It was made using the scales of flickering fish, an aquatic creature which lived deep within the marine dungeons. It possessed a trait to incapacitate any target, as such hunters loved using it in battles, but because of its highly effective results and poor usage by the hunters, who grew dependent on them, its usage and production both were certified illegal by the government. He asks Jean to look after herself and speeds off. Illegal hunters or smugglers had huge bounty on their heads, and no hunter or human was righteous enough to ask for help without a hidden motive. If he was careless, he would be in serious trouble. He is alarmed and notices Jean following him. He speeds disproportionately fast for her to even take notice. She is astonished and confused. At this point, he jumps on her, pinning her to the ground, and inquires what she was plotting. She states that she just wanted to thank him. Jean knew that was a definite lie and probes her further. She too had recognized he was an illegal hunter and smuggler, but despite that had a job offer for him. He pauses and notices the Warrior High School logo on her t-shirt. He declares that he won't be excusing her for a 3rd time and walks off, and affirms that he had no intention of helping a spoiled Warrior High student. She stops him in his tracks by stating the humongous rewards that were placed on smugglers and poachers. He, feeling threatened, instinctively turns with a fierce look in his eyes, but he is shocked when she furnishes out an item known as In Kill's Blood. She states that it would be just the down payment, and she promises to pay furthermore if he helped her the entire exam. Jarian had assumed she was just a wasteful brat, but that turned out be quite an understatement, since she was crazy rich. She replies that although she was crazed, it would be a life-changing opportunity for him. He knew beforehand that things would take such a turn. He says that although he didn't really have a reason to kill, he did say previously that she had only a few moments. As she staggers timidly, the ape pounces on them. Jarian throws his staff at Jean. He reminds her of how she had imbued her arrow with magic and asks her to do the same at the tip of his staff and pass it back to him. When she reports her magic power was depleted, he asks her to figure that out herself, since he wasn't confident of his bare-handed offense. As the ape punches at Jarian while Jean stares at the staff trying to replicate her magic, but she only had a quarter of her powers left. She knew defeating the monster was way past her league and even considers running away while Jarian distracted the ape. She questions her own actions as she passes the now magical staff to Jarian. He is quite disappointed since it barely valued and a quarter of its previous might, but was sufficient for him. As a student at Warrior High, Jean had often heard of how fueled brutal strength alone was while fighting a monster, but if accurately launched and well-timed, it was the most potential in what hunters were ought to train for. Since her childhood, Sarim was always differentiated, since she was a lucky girl what could acquire literally anything. The Ginseng Group, a business ranked 4th in the whole of Korea, the successor of the group, had engaged with another worldly elf, and the resulting child was Jean Sarum. She held adventures in the highest respect and was anxious to become one someday. Jean recalls of her childhood. During a training day, her uncle states that it was impossible for her to become a hunter. Her performance was just slightly better than an average human's, and might be since her elf blood might have been weak. He asks her father Jean Sunju on why he was so persistent, who replies saying he was simply cheering for her desire. He justifies saying that elf blood wasn't a necessity for becoming a hunter. Uncle now reminds him, saying although she was better than most humans, she wasn't a child from a normal family. Although if she kept in it without giving up and surviving the brutal society, she might become quite decent. Young Jean has reminded her that talent wasn't an everyday occurrence like Maj and Sen receiving views in a day. Love and reciprocate the appreciation, dear viewers. Just know you're loved even if your love life is dry. Subscribe to be flooded with love. Jean was awestruck at the scenario. The dead ape falls down to the ground as Charyong lands after exploding his throat. As he appears, Jean is shocked that his appearance almost close to hers in age. He previously had a mask on which obstructed recognition. Using face and voice change, he swears since the day wasn't faring quite well for him. Jean asks shyly if he was a senior from her school. He rather agitatedly asks for the promised item, which she hands over instantly. He looks at it carefully, trying to assess it. She asks if he was in dire need of money, reasonably since hunter schools and training fees were quite hefty. He abruptly declines, saying he didn't any institution, much less a hunter academy. She further asks who had taught him, which he answers to be none. At this reply, she freaks out, refusing to believe it. After witnessing his extreme skills, he throws his identity card at her face, silencing her. She is startled at the truth, and Jaryong immediately threatens her to hand over some proof of identity. He affirms that their ages did align and pockets the card. When she questions him, he replies saying he had to make certain she did not betray him later. He asks her to come closer to him. He wraps his arm around her and captures a picture to make her an accomplice, since a henchman and smuggler received the same punishments. She soon realized that she had been involved in something quite frightening, and it was too late for her to retrace. He proceeds with the dealings and asks of what she was supposed to collect during her test, to which she replies saying coins. Within the allotted 6 hours, they had to collect randomly placed coins throughout the forest. She had one already and needed to find a coin box to certify as a student and find another coin to pass the exam. She insists that it was at the ruins of the previously Eugene Mall, which wasn't quite far away either. He is alarmed hearing it. It wasn't coincidental, since they both were heading towards the same location. Jean is shocked hearing of the Imperial Wasp, while Jaryong emphasizes it wasn't the wasp but the jelly he was after. The ape too, it probably smelled of it and had come across them, although it wasn't a bother to him. Jean had the same destination. He offers her a change her course, but she mentions that it was the only place, since the other parties had probably occupied the others. He now realizes why she was alone. He decisively speaks that they would specifically find the coin and leave. When he is about to name his price, Jean decides that at millions, since it was all the cash she had on her. She offers more, but he agrees, stating that he would charge further considering what events occurred. He confirms if she had enough stamina to go the distance, and the duo speeds past the forest. While Jean remarks at his speed, Jarian feels conflicted, thinking he ought to have charged more. She asks if he had really taught himself, to which he replies saying not entirely. That's it for today. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.